Let's look at the past lives of JD Vance. Welcome to Trevor's Tarot, Astrology, and Spirituality. First off, a huge thank you to everybody who's subscribed to the channel. Thank you for liking, watching, commenting on the videos, sharing the videos, promoting the channel on other channels, doing everything you do to help the channel grow. A huge, huge thank you. If you've given money to the channel through the Buy Me Coffee, Venmo, Super Thanks, a huge, huge thank you. It's very, very much appreciated. Okay, so this video has taken me probably 3 to 4 weeks to kind of put together. So um, JD Vance has an energy that's not mysterious, but um, kind of hard to tap into, I guess. Um, like his present day self is somewhat predictable in its unpredictability in some ways, if that makes sense. As far as past lives, I have three I'll tell you about. I picked up a few more, but they didn't really they didn't seem that significant. So we'll look at the past lives. We'll see how um, they're impacting his current iteration, which is him as the setting vice president. And we'll kind of go in what I think is the chronological order, but I'm not quite sure about some of these uh, dates. So the the first one I think takes place in like maybe the 200s, 300s BC area in India. Um, and in this iteration, uh, he was born either intersexed, um, or, I think a more derogatory term is hermaphrodite, uh, whichever term you want to use it. I think he had um, external genitalia of kind of both sexes, which is slightly unusual. Usually it's kind of an internal and external might not match, but usually both externals aren't present. And in this iteration, of course, they're, completely outcast um, as soon as they reached like the puberty stage of life, and then survived basically being, a sex worker, and had a pretty horrible life experience. But I'm curious how this shapes the current day thinking, especially with all the weird statements about gender going on in the United States and the misrepresentations about gender. Um, how does this did this maybe influence that in his current iteration? Uh, so yeah, it was a pretty awful thing. I think they lived to maybe, you know, 15, 16, and then were killed. Um, but survived as essentially a sex worker. Okay, what do we need to know about this iteration and how it relates to the current day JD Vance? So just like I feel the word insecurity, it's a feeling. I think this explains a lot of his insecurities about his masculinity, or his need to express it outwardly. Like I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of him clean shaven. He's you know, looks completely different. What's this say about the current iteration? I also think this iteration made him kind of untrusting of parental units. So we get that Knight of Wands, fiery messages coming out of him with respect to gender and sexuality. I don't know that he believes any of it. I think that's just the expression. It's kind of like in that iteration that we're talking about with the intersexed um, life. I think it was something that was like a guarded secret and tried to keep it very secretive, but it wasn't able to. Um, and now in this current iteration as vice president, it's like, he protests too much almost. Like, kind of makes me question a little bit about his gender. It might be a little bit provocative, but it does. We get the King of Pentacles, the wealthy man. Um, I think this is why he's subservient to people with wealth, is because that was a survival technique. And I think that's kind of a common theme throughout these iterations of having this survival technique of using people that were in more positions of power. Now, this life that we're currently talking about as a young intersex child certainly was relying on people in power, but there was nothing wrong with that, right? That was just a survival technique. It wasn't any sort of abusive thing. It was just kind of a terrible existence, one that I would hope he would learn from. The Seven of Cups, I think this kind of makes him realize that kind of the spectrum of existence. I don't think he's as naive as he sounds when it comes to gender and sexuality. I think he's very well versed in all of those things. He's had transgendered friends, for example, that have done interviews. I think it's just, he's an opportunist in this particular life. It's like all these past lives were converging to this one. Well, when we get into the other two, I think you'll see what I mean by that. And yeah, at the center, he has a deep sense of loss. Like he knows what it is to have zero control over life. And I think in some instances, as a child in this iteration, that's probably true as well. And so he has this deep sense of loss. He just doesn't empathize with it currently. Now, he's still quite young. He's not even 40. He might later empathize with it. He might not. He might just be a, a jerk for the last lack of a better word, his whole life. We'll just have to see. We get the Six of Swords. Uh, I do think this propelled him forward spiritually in his understanding of existence and how it's not so cut and clear, black and white. Uh, how people have to do things that they don't want to have to do to survive. In this case, as a young person, you know, it felt pretty horrible. We get the King of Cups, or yeah, King of Cups. Um, one would hope this would make him more of an emotional leader, one that's a little bit more empathetic. Uh, doesn't seem to have so far. So we'll see. the Nine of Swords. I think he suffers from anxiety. I think it's like a past life trauma almost. I don't think he'd ever verbally acknowledge this, but if you watch some of his mannerisms, they're very defensive and, like trying to make himself come across more masculine than he actually is, which is always why there's something very bizarre about him. Sexuality aside, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about gender. Uh, I don't know that his outward gender expression really fits his inward gender expression. Maybe you should ask that at the last question, but there's something a little bit off there. And I think that's what this life was about. And then we get the Ten of Swords, complete and utter downfall, um, at no fault of his own or their own in that current iteration. Let me take a sip of tea. Okay, so it's like the fiery messages that were thrown at them during this first iteration that we're talking about, and a few hundred BC, somewhere in India, is what it felt like. Uh, gave a spirit a pretty deep sense of loss, also gave him a pretty deep sense of complete and utter downfall. And this is kind of going to be a common theme of needing to experiencing these extreme downfalls. Now, this one in particular had nothing to do with anything he did wrong whatsoever. Um, so you would hope that'd make him a more empathetic leader, knowing about the loss that one can experience, and also knowing about all the possibilities that fulfill the spectrum of gender and sexual identity. We'll see. Doesn't appear that he's going to learn that lesson. Uh, but, stranger things have happened. I do think it's given him some sort of wound that's caused a lot of anxiety, still has it. Uh, he's moving forward. He likes to keep the company of people that can support him if needed. Again, this was out of necessity in this iteration that we're talking about, but in this current iteration that he is as vice president, this is keeping people with money and power so that he could gain power. And I feel like all these lives will find are converging onto one point, which is the current life. But um, yeah, this is a very sad life. There's just too much on the plate, couldn't handle it. Was obviously nobody's happy to be murdered, but I think that's what happened, and I think it was a sense of relief because the existence was pretty hard. It was interesting to visit, and lots of good lessons that could be learned from it. We'll have to wait and see if they actually are. Okay, so the second iteration, this is, I think, somewhere in um, Rome times, 300, 400 AD, kind of still during the feudal state system. Uh, it felt like he was part of the government, but wasn't like the main person. He served under somebody. I'm just going to call it a Caesar. I don't know that it was a Caesar. This is what I'm going to use as a term. Um, and in order to keep his position, he was kind of forced to do some pretty horrible things or go along with some pretty horrible things. And so he had a lot of people uh, executed, for example, uh, for personal gain in order to keep this position of power. He, I think the thinking was that he would eventually go up the ranks and achieve more power himself. That never happened. It, it, he very much ended kind of in a similar way to the first iteration, where the person above him had him killed, basically to cover up the crimes that he had been doing. You know, he had been doing these crimes for this person, and then the Caesar, that's just what we're calling him out, I think that's actually what the title was, um, said, this person's committed all these crimes, even though he did them for me, he's guilty of all these things, so he needs to go. So he was executed in that iteration. So now that seems like a lot of parallels to today's existence in some ways. But what are we supposed to, what's he supposed to learn? What's this tell us about his current iteration, his life as kind of essentially like a mobster would be maybe a good way to describe it, but in kind of an official capacity. That tell us about his current iteration. So in this iteration, I don't think he was ever married. I don't know that that's relevant necessarily, but it was like he was solely invested in gaining power and doing whatever he was told to do to try to get that. What does this tell us about the current iteration? Yeah, I think you'll like, if we ever really knew him, I think we'd find that he's not a very trusting person, which might seem counterintuitive to the way he acts, but I think that's true. So we get the star card of protection. He somehow is associating being surrounded by people in power with protection. And he never learned that from this iteration that we're talking about, where he was underneath the Caesar and committing these crimes and then was executed. Like, that certainly did not provide him protection, but he somehow associates people with power or people with money as protectors. This is a lesson I think he's going to have to learn. He's rather immature still in his spiritual involvement. Like, I don't think he's learned a lot from this life that we're talking about currently. Again, the Ten of Swords. This is surprising. I wouldn't be surprised if we pull it up in all four readings. Complete and utter downfall. That's how most of the three lives that we're going to talk about basically ended. Walking away from things that no longer serve us. That's in his energy field. He has the ability to walk away from things that don't serve him, such as the current president of the United States. I don't know that he has the fortitude. Like, I don't know that he's got the maturity to do it. He knows he needs to. Like, there'll come a point where he knows he needs to, but whether he can do it or not is highly questionable. Again, bringing forward messages of an emotional nature is at the center of the reading. In this case, in this iteration, he was basically the one that went from door to door and said, "You've committed this crime, you've committed this crime," and had them eliminated if his boss thought they were a threat. We had families, reunions, and celebrations. It's interesting. I didn't pick up that he had a family in this iteration. Um, it could be this iteration that made him decide to come back with families because he has families in the next one that we're going to talk about and in the current one. Again, I just pick up this immaturity. Like I'm focused more on the children in this picture, and they're just joyfully playing naively, not a care in the world. I feel like that was his approach in this, even though he was carrying out these atrocities. It's like it was almost like a naiveness to it. It it felt like a game. Like I don't think he really comprehended the magnitude of it. It's the Two of Pentacles, juggling things, overseas affairs. Here, I think it's talking about just juggling different power structures and people with power and maybe trying to play both sides of the fence. I didn't pick up that there was another side of the fence, but now that that came up, it wouldn't have surprised me if he was playing two different leaders against each other, and that's why he ended up getting executed. That's certainly a possibility. I didn't pick that up at the time, but that does seem to sort of fit the overall feeling. And again, the Six of Swords coming up again. So forward momentum in the environment around and bombshells and surprises. So looking for protectors, not afraid to spread emotional messages and cause bombshells and surprises. I think these are all true today. Juggling different power structures, bringing forward these emotional messages, but they ultimately ended in his downfall. And in this case, literally stabbed in the back in that life. And in the environment around, he was the spy in the camp. Again, this does make me think that maybe there was another leader that he was trying to please both of them, perhaps. Um, and he's getting forward momentum out of this life that we're talking about. It's given him the ability to know that he might have to walk away from things and realizing that family might be something he's interested in. I'm pretty sure he didn't have a family in this iteration, but I could be wrong. We get the apprentice card. If one plan doesn't work, try another. Messages about money, and then, yeah, death. There was lots of death in this one. He caused a lot of death. He himself was killed. And judgment by who? By the emperor, the leader, or the Caesar, as I called him, although I don't know that that's the correct term, because I don't necessarily think that's quite right. And the abuse of power of the leader. So that that life was also, I think, pretty hard. I think, although he was very cruel, in some sense, I don't know that he, again, had a choice in the matter. It was almost like he was kind of born into it, and that's just the way things developed naturally. So now this third iteration, I think I'm going to use this deck again. Just give it a tap. Okay, so the third iteration was pretty disturbing. So I think this takes place around the 1600s, maybe, and like 1620s, 1650s, somewhere in that range. It takes place somewhere in Europe, on the western side of Europe. Could be France, could be England, possibly somewhere along those lines. And this iteration, he had a wife and a daughter, and never really found any sort of gainful employment, tried, had several, um, worked several jobs for people, manual labor for richer folk, so to speak, and never seemed to hold a job. Or sometimes it wasn't his fault, sometimes it was. Had a little bit of a substance abuse problem with alcohol. Um, his family went hungry a lot. He, as a result, committed various crimes. Nothing too terribly serious, but well, I mean, I guess all crimes are serious, but stealing a loaf of bread to me is a little bit forgivable, um, or very forgivable. But like low kind of petty theft to kind of support the family. And then um, he was friends with somebody that was in the government. I don't know if this was like a sibling or a cousin or something along those lines. And it's like he kind of got word that they were going to come for him. And so he literally went to one of these rich benefactors and um, sold his daughter for money to buy a ticket to uh, the United States, which of course was not the United States at the time, but the colonies, um, and didn't tell his wife about it at all, just left her behind, sold the young daughter to this rich guy, took the money, got on a boat, and then died on the trip over from probably something like dysentery, something along those lines. So very disturbing um, iteration. What's this tell us about it? Again, the common theme is this wanting, this idea that the wealthy provide protection, I think is a common theme, which has been proven to be untrue in all of his iterations so far. We'll have to see about the current one. So we get the Queen of Cups. There's a lot of desperation in this iteration. Um, it doesn't forgive the things that happened, but it was a lot of desperation. And I think that's what the Queen of Cups is representing here is this like overwhelming emotion of just not knowing what to do, and but still at the same time being quite selfish. So it was a good. We get the Ten of Cups again, families, reunions, celebrations. I think at one time in this iteration, he was quite content with the family. But later, obviously, they just became pawns and became a thing to get money from. Yeah, it taught him weird lessons about money. People are willing to pay for anything. We get the magician card in the environment around. This dark energy kind of surrounds him. This is really dark, heavy lives. All three of these lives that I've described they feel a little bit out of control, like a lot of things weren't in his control. This last one, a little bit, like especially the selling of the daughter, that I think was very much in his control. Because it was really just thinking about himself and escaping. Um, but being born into poverty in this case, the first iteration being born intersexed and not having any choice but to work as a sex worker, The second iteration, you know, like everything was very desperate, like in a selfish way. It's maybe a little bit hard to explain. So guardrails is at the center of the reading. So learning that guardrails are in place, boundaries are there for a reason, is what he should have been learning from this iteration. I don't know that he did. Things are inevitable, setting sail, overseas travel, realizing the mobility of life, perhaps. The sins of the fathers, what comes to mind here? No, the expression's the sins of the mother, but the sins of the father, they're supposed to look out for their children. In this case, he didn't. He very much used the young daughter for his own financial gain. The Two of Swords, making choices and unlikely partnerships, the lovers. And I think this speaks to his partnership within somebody within the government. So, like, overwhelmed emotionally, wasn't able to fulfill the boundaries, and ends up using unlikely partnerships to escape the situation. Happening to know somebody that was willing to pay money for his daughter, for example. The sins of the father should lead to boundaries and lead to new discoveries. I don't know that they will. We'll have to see. It doesn't feel like it, but they could. We get the Two of Swords. Choices have consequences. There's like this undercurrent of really darkness that just kind of surrounds his soul at this point. Um, it's like he wants to suffer, which is a little bit scary. Like he wants that. It's inevitable that he learned something. Hopefully, he learned a lesson about family. I feels like he kind of did. At least he hasn't done anything horrible that we know of. Although he said some things about his kids in his current iteration that's a bit disturbing, like, you know, the way he disciplines them, for example. We get a temperance, and then we get the wealthy man and surprising new beginnings. So again, this kind of obsession with surrounding himself with, like, thinking that people that have wealth and power are going to protect him seems to be a common theme. In the first iteration, it seemed to be a survival technique, but in the other two, it almost felt like a fallacy that he was supposed to learn, but he didn't learn. All right, so let's just ask what we should know about his current iteration and how this relates to the three that we've talked about. Should we know about the current iteration? Very much, I don't think he can be trusted. Regardless of what he says, if he says something bad, he might not mean it. If he says something good, he might not mean it. He literally can't be trusted on anything he says. Yeah, I think there's some gender confusion there, for entertainment purposes only. I'm not talking about sexuality. I think there's some flaws there in his identity, but it feels like, and I'm not saying he's like transgendered or anything like that. I'm just saying that, like, his definition of masculinity is very confused. His definition of femininity is confused. And therefore, his definitions of gender and gender roles are really confused. Although, I mean, he could be, you never know. I think again, he thinks that rich and powerful people can protect him. I think he might discover that is not the case again. He has the ability to walk away from this idea that rich and powerful people are protecting him. He has he knows that it's not true, right? Like intellectually, I think he knows, and I think his soul knows on an ethereal level, but whether he can actually pull the string when the time comes to walk away from a situation is a different story. Again, the Queen of Cups, um, just a lot of despair. Like, I don't think he's a very happy individual. He doesn't come across as one. He kind of comes across as angry. At least to me. Wow, the Ten of Swords in the same spot. Complete and utter downfall. So I wouldn't be surprised if they appeared in all four readings. And I don't remember if they did in the last one. I don't think they did, but um, three of the four. Complete and utter downfall. We'll get more clarification of that. Surrounding himself again, circles of support and money, surrounding himself with rich people in an attempt to stay safe, but it's like an ill-fated notion, right? Because we get ill health at the center of the reading. This could be ill mental health. It could be ill physical health. I don't know of anything. I've not picked anything up about that. I definitely have picked up that there's some mental health issues. Um, Nothing that seems to be extraordinary beyond, the normal person, but definitely some confusion about gender. The King of Cups and the environment around, very much wanting to be seen as an empathetic person, um, but will never be seen that way. Again, wealth and prosperity, everything he thinks he wants and needs, turns out won't work. We get the King of Pentacles, the rich man. This is sometimes my card for the President of the United States. In the environment around, again, surrounding himself with these rich, powerful people, and then firing new leadership or firing new career in this case. So he had the ability to walk away from these rich and powerful people. He chose not to. He chose to take their money because it's kind of a mental illness in a sense. And that led him to his current position of vice president. That's what the Ace of Wands is all about. Again, surrounding himself with wealth and prosperity is ill health. And I feel fairly that this is correct, that this is going to lead to his complete and utter downfall. We'll have to wait and see. In the environment around, we have the President of the United States. He wishes, though, he was seen as somebody who had empathy. He can feel things, he just can't express them. And so instead, he chooses to surround himself with money in an attempt to mask what's really going on. So surprising new beginnings, more new beginnings. I feel like these iteration, maybe he's got one more iteration where he has to learn this lesson. We'll see. It's possible he learns it this life. It's possible. Doesn't seem like it, but it's possible. So yeah, definitely a sad, some sad lives. And that's the current energy that, like I said, it's like predictable in its unpredictableness. It's like bipolar kind of highs and lows and all sorts of mixed emotions. So, all right. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with another video soon.